Hello everyone, and today I'd like to talk about the Hermetic Principles, the 7 Hermetic Principles, and what those are, and where they came from, and how they can affect us if we're not aware of it, and how we can use them in our lives to better our lives. And first of all, the Hermetic Principles were written, they were understood many years ago, even before the Egyptians, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, if not longer. The first writer in Egypt that mentioned these laws was Tahuti. And that also, those teachings, these are gods, Tahuti and Thoth from Egypt. Whether they were real people or not, we don't know, but it's irrelevant because the teachings are still there. It's the teachings that are important, kind of like Jesus. It's the teachings that are important, not whether or not he existed. And when the Greeks visited Egypt, they read these texts. Tahuti was the god of writing. So, and then Thoth took that to another level, and he wrote the Emerald Tablets, which have these writings and teachings in them. So when the Greeks went to Egypt, they read them, and they realized they were very similar to the teachings of their god Hermes. And that's how Hermes Trismegistus, if I'm saying that right, Trismegistus, which means in Greek 3 times great. So I'm thinking it was the 3 gods that they were referring to. These teachings were later put into, in the 1800s, into the Kabbalion, which is more teachings of this ancient knowledge. And in them, they called them the Hermetic Principles. And these are laws of nature that cannot be changed. Hermetically sealed means it can't be changed. And well, Hermetic Principles means the same thing. These are principles, and principles means the very first and important principles of our life. So these are very important, and you can ask yourself why they're not taught more of in schools. They should be. Some are, but they're not fully understood. So the 7 Hermetic Principles, as they're called from the Kabbalion, the first one is mentalism, the law of mentalism, the principle of mentalism. And what that is saying is everything is mind. Everything is created by the mind first. Before you do anything, you think about it first. You get the image in your head and that you believe you can do it, and then you do it. But it starts in the mind. Everything is created by the mind. And this can go as deep as the universe itself. The universe is mental. It's created mentally, and it is our perception of what we created as a universal thought. The creation of all of us and our mental thoughts. And that is the first one. I'm going to go through these because they require a video for each one. But this video is just to give you a broad sense of each what they each are. And number 2 is the principle of correspondence. And what this means is as above, so below, which you may have heard. But what does that mean? It means there is always a correspondence between the two, the macrocosm and the microcosm, and how those work together. The macrocosm meaning the outer world, which is the universe and how that works and what's going on up there, also happens in the microcosm within ourself, the small world. And I can give you an example. If you look at the universe, the way it goes, and how the planets revolve, and how they go around the sun, but then you look at the atoms within our body, and they are very similar the way they move. And the electrons and the protons go around the nucleus. This is an example of how what happens outside also happens inside. How our feelings are inside is how we project ourselves outside. And that is the principle of correspondence, as above, so below. And we'll get into more about that in future videos. Number 3 is the principle of vibration and what that means. The principle of vibration is very simple because everything vibrates. Everything has a vibration. Nothing is at rest. Now that may seem odd because you think things are at rest, that some things are not vibrating, like your coffee cup. It looks like it's at rest sitting there on the table doing nothing. But if we look closer and examine it for what it truly is, we can look down to the atoms and see that the electrons and protons are moving around in that coffee cup and causing a vibration. The earth vibrates at the Schumann resonance, which is the resonation of the earth, vibrates at 7.58. It fluctuates, it goes up and down, but the average fluctuation, the vibration is about 7.58 megahertz. So everything on the earth is vibrating as well. Sound frequencies. You're listening to me, and that is a vibration. Everything vibrates, from sound to matter is just atoms vibrating atoms together, stuck together. And it's a concept that may be difficult to put your mind around, but it's true because it can be proven by science. We can look at things very closely and realize that they're in fact moving because the atoms in them are moving. So they're not at rest. And this is also one of the things that in schools today, they don't teach these things because maybe they do in some schools. But what they don't teach is that they knew this thousands of years ago. That concept doesn't sit well with a lot of people because they feel like in this day and age we are the smartest, and people 2,000, 3,000 years ago couldn't possibly know more than what we do today. But we're proving that they did. Maybe not more than some people, but most people. Because if you don't understand the laws of vibration and that everything is vibrating and moving, even your coffee cup, well, people 3,000 years ago did. And they wrote about it. It was one of their laws. They knew. And that might not sit well with a lot of people because they don't know how they knew. Well, this knowledge is coming from a civilization or from somewhere where they knew that what's happening in the universe is also happening within us. They knew that then. So that brings us on to the fourth, which is duality. Everything has poles. North and south has like our planet. Everything has opposites, like even our emotions, happiness, sadness, love and fear. These are opposites. Again, some people think hate is the opposite of love, but you need fear to have hate. So fear is the opposite of love. That's another discussion. But opposites, I think that's a duality. I think that's something we can all see, because but may not realize it's right in front of us that everything has an opposite, from stop and go to hot and cold. But what we don't realize is these opposites have a connection to one another. They almost cancel each other out, because hot is part of cold. You can't have stop without go. They're both extremes of the same thing, is what I'm trying to say. Because cold is just energy, a lack of it, and heat is just an abundance of energy, but it's all just energy. Stop and go is a motion, and it's a degree of it, or a lack of it, or more of it, but it's just one thing. So everything in the world has an opposite, a duality. And these are important things to know, because when we know these Hermetic principles, we can see the patterns in life, which allows us to understand things that we may not be able to understand about larger things like the universe. But knowing that everything has an opposite and a pole gives us a better understanding of the universe and ourselves and our emotions. And this also makes us think about all truths are half-truths, because the truth is just whether you acknowledge or a lack of knowledge. Truth and false is just knowledge, the extent of the same thing. And I think that is a difficult one to understand, but I think to explain that is, both sides of every war, they both think they're right. They both think they're right. Both sides of every war. Both sides. And how is that? Because their perspective, they are. But from the other perspective, they're not. But maybe they're both wrong. And they don't know it. So that's something to think about. We'll go into that more on another time. Which brings us to number 5, which is rhythm. Rhythm is the flow of the tides that go in and out. The pendulum swings back and forth. And this is something that happens in our life. It's action and reaction. When the pendulum swings this way, the reaction is to swing back. And this happens in our lives, and we have to understand that everything has a rhythm. Vibration is a rhythm. So these Hermetic principles, they interact with one another. And they approve one another. They work together. They validate it. And rhythm is something that happens in all things, thoughts to even in political cycles. It swings one way, and then when people get that so far, it swings back the other way. And that's just the way it works. Number 6 is cause and effect. This is one that is talked about a lot. Everybody believes they know what cause and effect is. When you swing a hammer trying to hit a nail with your eyes closed, you may hit your finger, and that's because of your actions, the causes that you had your eyes closed, and is why you hit your finger. That's the effect. And sometimes they're not as direct as that. Sometimes there is a time lag between what you're doing and the effects you get from it. If you do positive things, you may get positive effects back. You do negative things, you're going to get negative things back. And it may not be right away. It may take time. If you try to break these laws, and they can be broken, but you're going to pay a price for doing it. That's the cause and effect. And when everything has a cause, everything happens for a reason, and there's no such thing as coincidence. Coincidence is a word that we use when we don't know the reason. We say, oh, that was a coincidence that that happened. But then someone could say, no, it's because I did this. That's why it happened. Well, now that you know the reason, it's no longer a coincidence. For example, if you bump into someone that you know far away from your home, you say, wow, what a coincidence to see you here. But then he says, well, your mother told me you were here. Well, suddenly it's not a coincidence anymore because you know the reason. Sometimes we don't know the reason. That does not mean there was no cause. We see the effects. And this principle has two parts, the cause and the effect. The causes are what happened in the past that affect us today. We can't change those. But we can change what we do today to change the effects that are coming in the future. And this is important to understand. If we want to better ourselves in the future, we need to make the changes today. Right? That is cause and effect. We'll get into that more in a separate video, because nothing escapes this law, or any of these. So it's better that we understand them and live with them, because when you live with these laws, you rule them. When you don't use these laws, they use you. They control you, if you're unaware of it. And it brings a lot of misery, if that misery can be changed moving forward. Can't change the misery you've already had. And the last one is the principle of gender. This is an interesting one because a lot of people don't understand the principle of gender. And the principle of gender is everything has a masculine and feminine principle. From energy to human beings to our bodies, our minds, and the best way to explain this is talking about mentally. Our minds have a masculine and feminine thoughts and actions. The masculine side has more analytical reason, rational mind. There's the left side, and the right side mind is more creative and artistic, and that's the feminine. Women use that side more, and men use the left side more. But they both exist in everybody. The feminine mind exists in a man, even though a lot of men don't want to believe that, and that creates a lot of problems for them because they start acting over masculine to compensate for their thoughts, instead of just being who they want to be. And same thing with women. There's a masculine mind and a feminine mind, and they can get confused because we use different parts of our mind. And everyone can use different parts, and they have different personalities, but to understand them as a whole, you can bring them together. And women don't have to act all the same way, and men don't have to act all the same way. This is a confusion. Because inside their minds there are two hemispheres, part of the polarity. There's two energies. Everything has a gender existence, both genders existence within them. Now, there are some species of plants and animals that can regenerate on their own. They don't need another of their species to mate with. They have it all within themselves. And it's there. And some they need the other gender of their species to mate, to reproduce. And that's how reproduction is created. The principle of gender is everywhere, even in stars, and how they regenerate. They regenerate by two forces, pushing and pulling. And it's there. Those two forces are opposite forces. And the important thing about the principles of gender is the way couples get along and how they interact with one another. Because there's a lot of, some couples can get along great, never argue, never, for long periods of time. Then others will argue every weekend, and they just can't seem to get through to the other person. And I think that is because they don't understand the other half of the mind. So a lot of men, they can't understand women, and vice versa. But if they understood themselves, they would understand that, their mate and their partner, much better. And that's why the principle of gender, realizing that all those things are within us, makes a huge difference in relationships. And those are the 7 Hermetic Principles. That's what they basically are. Now, how are these useful to us? You know, how do they, what purpose do they have? And, you know, they say, why do you tell me these things that are so obvious? They seem obvious to everybody. But unfortunately, even though they're obvious, people are not using them in a way to benefit themselves. And we have to focus on them and be aware that they're there and live from our heart rather than our head sometimes, because our heart knows, our heart can think. And we know that when we use sympathy and empathy. It's a feeling that comes from our heart. And generally those Hermetic principles are there in our heart, but sometimes we have this programming that has been put into our minds by society to do certain things that break these principles. And that's not living in your heart. Because thoughts are not enough alone. You can think about something all day, but you actually have to act on it at some point. You know, you can think about something, but once you've got it pictured in your mind of how you would want to do it and you believe it, then you can do it. Once you believe you can do something and you've worked it out in your head, then you can do it. If you can't believe you can do it, then you're not going to. Simple as that. There are no mistakes, just lessons. And everything does happen for a reason. So if you can't believe or see yourself completing a task, well, maybe you need to learn some things. Maybe you need to try some things out, do some experiments where you then gain information that makes you say, ah, now I believe I can do it, or I didn't before. Then you'll be able to do it, no matter what it is. And there's also been some other concepts about another principle, the lost principle, which Mark Passeo. I'm going to post some videos down in the description box if you want to learn more about it. And I'll also be making some more on these because they are very important. And they can get ignored simply because there are ancient knowledge, and people do not believe that people in the past were smart enough to know this stuff. So they ignore it, or they discard it because it kind of changes their perception of what was going on in the past. They weren't just cavemen smacking rocks, you know. They knew, they had knowledge, and it existed in civilizations, and it's being released today. The stuff I'm talking about has always been there. It's always been taught, but it was taught in secret society schools. It's also taught in Freemasonry in the upper levels, Gnostics, and in the occult, which the occult just means hidden. People use the word occult as being an evil thing. And it can be if you use this information in an evil way, for self-serving ways. So that's why it was hidden, because there is a powerful information here. And now it's coming out, and it needs to be told, because we're at a time where we need to make changes in our society. And it's a desperate situation in some areas that if we don't make these changes, we could wipe ourselves out. So we have to learn. So this information is coming out so that as a society and as a whole, we can move forward in a more peaceful way. And that's all I have to say for now. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit the button so you will get new videos as I post them and make them. Thank you, and have a great day.